presentation role?
Yeah.
Okay.
I passed you the bullet.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my slide?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to this special session entitled Developments in Design, User Experience, and Usability, Contributions for the Context of Technological Environments. My name is Freddy Paz. I am Associate Professor at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú from Peru, and I will be chairing this special track. For this session, we have a total of 6 presentations with a duration of 2 hours from 16:30 to 18:30. We are going to start with the first presentation that will be performed by Elizabeth Salinas with the paper entitled A Systematic Review of User-Centered Design Techniques. Elizabeth, you can start with the presentation.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, I'm Elizabeth Salinas, and today I will present an article whose title is A Systematic Review of User-Centered Design Techniques. And the authors are Freddy Paz Espinosa, Ron Nicolau Moscoso, and me. We are from Lima, Peru, and we are from the Pontificia Universidad Católica of Peru. Okay. To start, I want to say that nowadays usability and user experience are considered key factors for the success of a software product. Graphical user interface must be understandable, easy to use enough to allow end user to achieve their goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction. And that can be achieved if a user-centered design process is followed during the development of a software product. This framework, described in the ISO 13407 standard, establishes 4 activities that cover for considering the user opinion for the development of the software product until the evaluation of obtained results. Likewise, the iterative nature of this activity is defined. User-centered design involves iterative until the goals are achieved. And the ISO 13407 standard establishes the basic principles and guidelines without defining the method. This work presents a systematic iterative review to determine the methods and tools that can be used during the UCD process. Because of that, this proposal is based on the review of success stories reported on redesign of software products. Okay. And to start, what is a systematic iterative review? It is a means of identifying, interpreting, and evaluating all available research relevant to a specific research question, topic area, or phenomenon of interest. And this work was performed following a methodology proposed by Kishenham and Charles in order to carry out an objective search. How was the systematic literature review carried out? For this work, 4 research questions were formulated to guide this review, and a certain basis of the criteria was developed. The databases used for the primary research were Scopus, IEEE Explorer, and ACM Digital Library. Well, the first step was to formulate a research question. For this, it's important to know that the purpose of this systematic literature review was to identify the techniques and tools that have been employed in order to make a design of graphical user interface following the user-centered design methodology approach, and that has been successful result in usability measures. Additionally, it showed the most reported usability evaluation methods in these cases, and the reason why this process took place. Because of that, these were the following research questions. The first was, what techniques have been used for the redesign of a graphical user interfaces of a software product following the user-centered design framework, and that have shown a successful result in usability evaluation. The second question was, what have been the most reported software tools in the literature that have been used for the redesign of graphical user interfaces of software products following the user-centered design framework? The third question was, what methods are the most reported in the literature to evaluate the usability of software product within the UCB framework? And the last, what are the reasons for designing the graphical user interfaces of a software product following the user-centered design methodology? Well, and the second step was to defining the criterion of the PICO criteria. The PICO criteria establishes 5 concepts that are population, intervention, comparison, output, and context. For population, in this case, the population was software product. The intervention was user-centered design methodology to redesign interfaces. And the comparison criterion was not taken into consideration because the research is not intended to compare interventions. About the output, in this case, was cases studies where user-centered design techniques have been applied for the redesign of software product interface. And the last, the concept was academic and industrial context. The third step of this systematic review was the selection of the source. In this case, the select database were 3. They were Scopus, IEEE4, and ACM Digital Library, because they are the most important for this area in information technology. The first step was to define the search string. First, to define the search string, we have to define the search sense. For the elaboration of this search string, 5 general concepts were proposed, taking into consideration the population intervention criteria defined previously, and different tests were established for each general concept. We established a total of 5 general concepts that are redesign, user interface, software, user-centered design, and methodology. Well, finally, this was the search string. We can see, for example, some terms relevant that are redesign, user interface, user-centered design, methods, and techniques. For this systematic literature review, we established some inclusion and exclusion criteria in order to determine if a specific article will be included in these works. And the inclusion criteria were the following. The article is written in English. The article presents a case study of redesign of graphical user interfaces of a software product following the user-centered design framework and has been successful in usability evaluation. The third was the article presents the use of methods, tools, or techniques for the design of a graphical user interfaces for the usability evaluation of a software product whose interface has been redesigned. On the other hand, we established some inclusion criteria in order to consider which article will not include in this work. And the exclusion criteria were the articles not relating to usability studies of software products. The second exclusion criterion was studies about redesign or usability evaluation of software products for people with disabilities. And the last was article related to usability study of virtual reality or 3D virtual environment software products. Data collection. The automated search for the systematic review was performed on September 17, 2019 in the Scopus database, and on September 19 in the IEEE Explore and ACM Digital Library. A total of 146 papers was a result. After the application of the exclusion and inclusion criteria, we selected only 18 relevant papers. Well, now I will report the results of this systematic review. About the first question that was about the techniques used for the redesign of graphical user interfaces of software products following the user-centered design framework. According to the results obtained for the systematic literature review, a large number of techniques used to work following the UCB methodology were identified, a total of 30 articles. And the most reported was prototyping, usability evaluation of the original graphical user interfaces, identification of the stakeholders and users, interviews, and focus groups. Well, prototyping was the most reported technique in a total of 12 articles, and it aims to design the initial or draft version of a system, which allows the designer to explore their ideas and show them to end users before to invest resources into development. In addition, according to many authors, the prototypes are primarily used for the communication, exploration, and evaluation of the design idea. Okay. The second question was about the software tool used for the redesign of graphical user interface of software products following the user-centered design framework. According to the results obtained from the systematic review, many articles did not report the tools that were used. Because of that, we only identified 3 tools for prototyping that were Drupal, POP 2.0, and Balsamiq Mockups. We identified 4 tools used during the usability evaluation. We were Prometheus, OBS Study, a screen record, and Morai. The third research question was about the methods to evaluate the usability of a software product within the USD framework. According to the results obtained in this systematic review, there are different usability evaluation methods used for this for evaluating the usability of a software product. Well, we identify in this case a total of 11 methods. The 5 most reported were user testing, surveys, questionnaires, interviews, usability metrics, performance metrics, and heuristic evaluation. Well, one of the most reported methods was user testing, and it is because it provides information about the problems that users could have with the interface they are testing. That is why, according to Nielsen, it is considered the most fundamental usability evaluation method, in some sense, irreplaceable. Okay. The last question for this systematic literature review was about the reason for redesigning the graphical user interface of a software product following the user-centered design methodology. According to the article resulting from the systematic literature review, there are different reasons for the design the interface of a software product following the user-centered design methodology. The reasons may vary depending on the use of the software. These include adapting the software product to the requirements and needs of the end users, improve the user participation in the effective use of the software, and improve the quality of the information dissemination. In addition, 2 reasons were identified as the most reported. One of them was to improve the usability of the software product, and the other was to improve the quality of the user experience. With this, it can be concluded that USD framework is a methodology that helps to design software product with good usability and adequate user experience. Since these articles selected for the systematic literature review have been reported as successful studies in usability evaluation. Likewise, it's important to remember that USD methodology is based on the needs and interests of the end users, and that is why it is used resulting in a software product with good usability and adequate user experience. Conclusions and further work. Our conclusion for the systematic review of the literature, we can conclude that the user-centered design methodology is one of the most suitable for designing graphical user interfaces of software products that show good results in usability evaluation. In addition, according to the protocol that we follow, 146 studies were identified, which only 18 were selected as the most relevant. And the most reported technique for the redesign interfaces in this systematic review were the following: prototyping, usability evaluation of the graphical user interface, identification of stakeholders, interviews, and focus group. And one of the most used usability evaluation methods is user testing, since it provides very useful information to detect the problems the user have with the of a system. Moreover, in this systematic literature review, we can identify the main reasons for redesigning the graphical user interface of a server product, following a use method approach that were to improve the usability and the user experience of a server product. Future work. As a future work, each report technique could be analyzed more deeply, and a list of criteria could be established to identify which technique will be the most appropriate to apply in each phase of the UCD methodology in a specific project. For this list of criteria, we can take into consideration the characteristics of a specific project and the characteristics of the user involved in this process. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for your presentation. Is there any question from the attendees or from the panel? You can raise your hand. Your virtual hand.
I have a question.
Okay.
In the context of the actual coronavirus, did you find experiences about remote evaluations?
Okay, in this systematic literature review, I identify cases of remote evaluation. I know that they exist, and I apply some in my thesis, but for this work, I didn't find some cases of this context.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Arturo. Is there any other question? Okay, I have a question about your study. According to what you have read in your systematic literature review, have you determined some methods that are better or more effective than others?
Well, with this work, it's possible to know which was the most reported technique which has contributed to obtain usable software products, since the article reviewed in this literature review are successful cases regarding usability measures. However, to know which technique will be the best to a specific project, we will have to consider other aspects, such as the characteristic of the server project and the user involved, for example, in this case, which is proposed as a future work.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for your presentation. We are going to continue with the next paper.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The next paper is going to be performed by Joel Aguirre. The name of the paper is Applying a UCD Framework for ATM Interfaces on the Design of QR Withdrawal, a Case Study. Joel, you can start with the presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to share my content right now. Give me a second. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. In this opportunity, I will present a case of study where we applied a UCD framework for the design of QR withdrawal. This case of study was made in collaboration with Arturo Moquillasa from the HCI Duxait Group, Research Group, from Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, and Samira Benazar from BBVA Peru. I will start introducing the case of study, what motivated this study, and then the framework will be described before explaining the case of study itself. And finally, I will end up with the conclusions. Okay, well, final users nowadays are more concerned about quality attributes more than the functionality a product could have. This is critical to the design of usable banking software. Self-service technologies and ATM are becoming ubiquitous, so ATM transactions have become a common activity in our daily life. The existing ATM is based on a system that employs 4-digit personal identification number and a physical card. However, studies and surveys confirm that at least 52.8% of cardholders share their bank cards and PIN with at least one friend or relative. This introduces the risk of fraud and loss of privacy. Added to this is the fact that when a cardholder loses a physical card, there is no quick way to use the ATM and get cash, since a replacement card requires hours or even days to be emitted. Several companies and studies have proposed different methods to not force the customers to make use of the cards nor the ATM PIN pad. The interest in the use of QR visual tags is a natural consequence of the evolution of mobile phones, and it has been used also to enhance banking authentication security. Even though several proposals for cardless withdrawals are reported in the literature, the problem of the user experience and usability persists. The experts consider that QR on mobile banking is still not perfect and needs improvement to be integrated with ATMs. In this sense, the BBVA in Peru, a leading bank in the country, summed up to the cardless operations trend and wanted to develop a cash withdrawal system based on mobile banking. This case of study focuses on the design phase of a whole project and employs the user-centered framework for the design of usable ATM interfaces that we proposed last year, being the best approach to design usable ATM interfaces. As I said, in 2019, we proposed a user-centered design framework for the design of usable ATM interfaces. This framework includes 4 processes that would fit in a determinate context of a team. Each sub-process, the simple one, the fast one, the low-cost one, and the optimal one, was diagrammed as a process in order to define a real workflow. The methods employed were the fast ones, and were the following. Well, the phases of the framework correspond to the 4 phases of the 13047 standard, and the methods were identify stakeholders, where the team has to list all users and stakeholders of the system. The method field of study or observation, where the team has to establish the objectives and type of events. The competitor analysis, where the team has to compare through evaluation of systems that own the competitors in order to not repeat the usability problems that the competitors have. Also, the scenarios of use, where the team has to define the scenarios with images and explanations. The methods persona, where the team has to specify user profiles
Joel, are you there? We are having connection maybe problems.
Maybe Joel has problem with his internet connection.
Okay. In this case, we are going to wait some minutes, but
If we can wait about a minute if he will connect again, or we have to continue with the next presentation then.
Yeah.
maybe it's better to continue the next presentation, and if we have time at the end, give the bullet to
we can return to the presentation of Joel, but I think that he's connecting right now.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Joel, can you hear us?
Okay, so let's continue with the next presentation until Joel returns to this session. We're going to continue with the next presentation, the next study performed by Joe Sawa. He's going to present the paper entitled A Systematic Review of Usability Evaluation Methods and Tools for ATM Interfaces. Joe, you can start with your presentation.
Okay, thanks. Well, first, welcome everyone, and thanks for being here. My name is Joe Sawa, and I'm going to present this paper titled A Systematic Review, Usability Evaluation Methods and Tools for ATM Interfaces in collaboration with Arturo Moquillaza. We are part of the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Perú community from Lima, Peru. First, I want to point out some usability benefits that are the following: increased user productivity, decrease in user errors, decrease in software training costs, lesser design changes in early stages of a project. Wait a minute. Okay. And reduction of user support. Nowadays, usability is determinant for the success of any software product, including the automated teller machines or ATMs. Okay. Now, there are some usability issues that carry to a problem that is a frustration of the users during the experience with the ATMs. Those issues are the increase of functionalities, few considerations of users' needs, and few usability principles and guides for ATM interfaces. The main objective of this study is to provide information, but provide information about the usability evaluation method that can be used on ATMs. The second objective is to analyze a study that can help us to define or create usability evaluation and a usability evaluation process. And third, identify techniques and tools that may help us to create protocols of usability evaluation and also methods, especially of the quantitative type, in order to measure and compare the evaluated ATM interfaces. Now, the systematic review process. The main objective of this systematic review process was to identify usability comparisons and evaluations made to ATM applications, self-service systems, and other banking systems or applications. This systematic review process follows what Keith Chenham and Chartered proposed. Well, first we start with the research questions. For that, we created a PICOC table with the following criterion: population, intervention, comparison, outcomes, and context. For a population, we have the ATM system interfaces. For intervention, usability comparisons, guidelines, and heuristics used in comparisons. For comparisons, we don't have comparisons because we are not going to compare studies. What we are going to compare are the ATM interfaces. The outcomes are the usability comparisons applied on ATM interfaces of different banks and techniques, guidelines, and heuristics used to measure the level of usability of ATM interfaces. And the context is an academic context and a software industry context. Now, with the help of the PICOC table, we defined two research questions. The first one, what usability comparisons and evaluations have been made between ATM systems of different banks? And second, what techniques and guidelines have been used to measure the level of usability of ATM interfaces? Now with that, we start with the search strategy. For that, we created some search strings with the three principal topics of this study that are comparisons or evaluations. Second is the ATMs, and third, the usability. Now, then we selected some databases. For this study, we selected four that are Scopus, IEEE Explore, ACM Digital Library, and SpringerLink. We selected those databases because those are some of the best databases for science and engineering research. The selection and exclusion criteria. The selection and exclusion criteria were defined. The purpose of this is to select or discard studies, depending on its relevance for this study. First, we have the selection criteria, the relationship with the following topics: usability comparisons and evaluations made to banking applications of different banks. Second, guidelines or heuristics recommended for measuring usability of banking applications. Third, improvements in the usability of the main functionalities of an ATM. And fourth, positive or negative opinions of the usability of ATMs. And in the case of the exclusion criteria, we have first providing improvements in hardware design. We are focused full on software design. Second, refers to the term ATM in communication, biological, or other contexts. ATM has multiple meanings in different fields of study, not only in software study. And third, publications in languages other than Spanish and English. Now, the third step of the systematic review is a process execution. After researching with the use of search strings on the databases selected, we created the following chart. We have four databases. In the Scopus, we found two relevant studies. In the case of IEEE Explore and ACM DL, we didn't find any relevant studies. And for SpringerLink, we found 10 relevant studies. So in total, 12 relevant studies. These are the following studies. We separated them by its topic. For example, here we have 8 studies for a topic of usability guidelines and techniques. And here 4 studies related to evaluations and comparisons. Now, with the studies, with the article found, we were able to answer the research questions. The first one is, what usability comparisons and evaluations have been made between ATM systems of different banks? Yeah, we found some evaluations made on ATMs, some usability evaluations. Some articles carry out evaluations with the objective of observing if the interfaces evaluated are usable and find usability errors. But one article goes beyond all of that and not only evaluates usability on ATMs, also carries out comparisons of ATM interfaces of some, in this case, silent banks. For a second question, what techniques and guidelines have been used to measure the level of usability of ATM interfaces? We found that 5 studies are related to ATM. In this case, for graphic interface design techniques, methodologies, and features. One article is focused on full banking systems that also includes ATMs, mobile applications, web from banking. We also found one article that proposes user-centered interface, but for systems in general, globally. And one exposes improvement for self-service interfaces with touch screens. ATMs is a self-service, so this study is of huge help. Now, we also found some tools that were used on some evaluation. First, the user's evaluations, questionnaires, the ATM's own software, prototypes, video cameras or screen recorders, event logging software, and heuristic evaluation. Now, for conclusion, in this study, we managed to find guidelines and techniques used to design usable interfaces. We found like 5 studies that make some kind of usability evaluation, but only one that makes comparisons for ATM. So there is a lack of usability evaluations and comparison for ATM, which is a bit strange because there are thousands of banks and they should be aware about the product they give to their clients, to their customers. For future works, we are going to define an usability evaluation and comparison process with information found in this study. And with that usability evaluation and comparison process, execute that and evaluate ATM interfaces of Peruvian banks, taking on account different user profiles, selecting the banks, and selecting the functionalities to be evaluated. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Joy, for your presentation. We are going to start with the questions. Is there any question about the attendees? You can raise your hand if you have a question. Arturo has a question.
Yes, I have a question. According to this review, you can say that usability is comparable?
Yes. We found some research about quantitative and qualitative comparisons, but in this case, we found that quantitative usability evaluation is easier to compare because we have numbers, we can compare numbers, so it's easier. But with the information we found, with the articles we found, yes, usability can be compared, usability in ATMs.
Thank you, Joy. Is there any other question about this presentation? Okay, Joy, according to what you have read in the literature, what method would you suggest, for example, to a team that doesn't have enough financial resources?
Okay, first let me show this. In case of not a lot of money for the research, the tools that you can follow are users evaluation. You can use your friends, your family, in case they follow your definition of potential candidates for the evaluation. Questionnaires, there are a lot of free tools in the internet like Google Forms for questionnaires. In the case of ATMs, own software and prototypes, I recommend prototypes because for ATMs own software, you should have contacts in multiple banks. That can be difficult. So prototypes is the best option because there are free programs to make prototypes. In case of video cameras or screen recorders, and screen recorders, there are options, free options in the web. Also, some computers have this tool, so practically it's free. Event logging software, I think there are free event logging software too. And in case of heuristic evaluation, it's difficult to find some experts for heuristic evaluation. But if you have, for example, in the university, you have the experts that can help you, you can use heuristic evaluation too. But it's in the case you don't find experts, because I know it's difficult to find experts, users evaluation is okay.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you. We are going to continue with the previous presentation of Joel Aguirre. He had a connection problem, and he had the scenario to continue with his presentation.
Yes, sorry for the inconvenience. I'm going to share my content again. Now I have a stable connection. As I was saying, in the case of study that I was presenting, the team was executing a process through 4 phases. The second phase that we stopped were the requirement specification. They made a competitors analysis and specified this list of requirements. Okay, these were the more relevant one. So the third phase was the design of the prototypes, the cells. The brainstorming was a method that was not originally selected. It's not part of the FAST methods, but because of the lack of experience of the team that was executing the process, they introduced these methods to start the designing. And after the brainstorming, the team divided in 3 separate groups where they made paper prototypes for the solution, and finally they merged these ideas into a final interactive prototype. Here we can see the first screens for accessing the cardless transactions and QR withdrawal, and also the workflow itself of the QR withdrawal, where they have to scan, and also the withdrawal process. For the last phase, the evaluation of the interfaces, experiment was held with 7 participants in the ATM laboratory of the BBVA in Peru. The test consisted in performing a QR withdrawal simulation. Okay, this simulation had to include the mobile app prototypes also. For some of the findings that were found in this evaluation, well, they were found improvements for the initial proposals. For example, some of them were related for the available bills in the ATM, and the instructions of how to scan the QR, because these instructions were not clear according to the representative users. Also, from the evaluation, the developers learned that to maintain the sense of security, the status of the system between the ATM and the mobile app must be really must be accordant. So in this case, you can see the error at the ATM screen is the same message showed in the mobile app, in the same way with the success operation is the same information showed in the ATM. So the conclusions that were made in this case, well, the team could design from scratch in this opportunity a new functionality, which is the QR withdrawal system. In previous studies, the framework showed in this presentation was only validated for redesigned processes. This is a new study showing that this framework also is usable to design from scratch. Also, performing a structured design process with established phases help the team to understand the real context of the actual cardless solutions that are available on the market. Also, the activities performed help them to reach an agreement faster than before with all the stakeholders. Also, through the evaluation, the team realized the importance of matching the status from the different channels I mentioned. This to maintain the perception of security, to not affect that aspect, and also this framework is important to highlight. The framework is employed is specific for ATM interfaces and is not intended to be used in the design of mobile interfaces. However, taking into consideration the mobile app was mandatory, and the resultant mobile apps could be taken into consideration as an input for the mobile channel stakeholders for future evaluations. And also, in addition, the participants of the development team, now that they are participating in the same task, this allowed them to acquire new skills and get involved in this end-to-end process. Also to know the context of use of the actual solutions and emphasize more with the final user. Well, that was all. Thank you. This is my email, my personal email, and also the email from HCI Duxaid Research Group from Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel, for your presentation. Is there any question about this research? Arturo has a question.
Yes, I have a question. Was the proposal finally implemented? What was the feedback in general in other areas of the bank?
Yes, this study was held by the end of the last year, and by those times, these kind of solutions were just a trend. The feedback in that time was good. It has good expectations for the stakeholders, but nowadays, these kind of solutions with contactless systems and using mobile apps are getting more attention because of the COVID situation that we are facing this year. So now this solution, this QR withdrawal, is in the eyes of all the bank. Is now a good solution for avoid the direct contact with a physical card or even the PIN pad, which is nowadays a real how can I say this, a focus of contamination for the COVID. So it's nowadays these kind of solutions are getting more attention and are more relevant.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Arturo. Is there any other question from the attendees or from the panelists? Okay, Joel, I have a question. Is possible to improve the framework that you have presented? According to what you say, you have tested this framework in different scenarios. Have you used these results to improve the framework? Are you planning to redefine maybe the framework according to the results?
Yes, the last year, as I mentioned, a real development team redesigned an operation in ATM. They made use of the simple process, and in this case, the process used was the fast process, and the team itself recognized that there are methods on the fast process that can apply also in the other three processes that we defined in the framework, and vice versa. In this case, they took the brainstorming from the simple methods and included in the fast method. So these processes can be redefined through the experience that the real teams are getting in applying this framework. So it could be improved.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you so much. We are going to continue with the next paper. The next presentation will be performed by Fiorella Falconi. She is going to present the study titled A Systematic Literature Review about Quantitative Metrics to Evaluate Usability and Security of ATM Interfaces. Fiorella, you can present your research.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen.
Okay.
Yes, you
we can see
the
now.
Presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Fiorella Falconi, and I present the paper A Systematic Literature Review about Quantitative Metrics to Evaluate Usability and Security of ATM Interfaces. The authors of this paper are Claudio Zapata, Arturo Moquillaza, Freddy Paz, and Fiorella Falconi. We are from Lima, Peru, from the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. These are the contents of this presentation: introduction, relevant concepts, systematic literature review, search results, conclusions, and future works. This paper is part from my thesis work about methods for evaluation of usability and security of ATM interfaces. And in this thesis, I had 4 objectives. And the second one was the compilation of usability and security of interfaces metrics. For this objective, we made this systematic literature review. So, more than 50 years ago, Joe Shepard invented the first ATM in London for the request of Barclays Bank. Since then, ATMs have evolved. At the beginning, the only transaction was withdraw cash. Over the time, more complex financial transactions were added, such as payments, balance inquiries, data updates, among others. We cannot ignore that the ATM should be as friendly as possible. An important aspect to improve the usability and, in general, the user experience is to consider the emotional state, feelings, and the emotions that the final user experiences before, during, and after interact with the ATM. When we are talking about ATMs, security and safety should be considered since ATMs are targets of different criminal acts. That is why financial institutions add surveillance cameras, electronic devices, and others. In this context, the industry needs to use techniques to obtain quantitative results over the ATM interfaces to objectively measure aspects of usability and security of ATM applications. In this paper, we present a systematic literature review about metrics that are reported in the literature about usability and security in banking software. The objective was to identify if there are currently specific metrics for ATM interfaces and others that evaluate bank software that can be input to build the mentioned metrics. These are some relevant concepts to understand the presentation. What is an automatical teller machine, or as we know like an ATM? It's a computerized telecommunication device that provides in real time access to the clients of a financial institution to their bank accounts in a public space without intervention of the administration of the financial institution. The customer commonly is identified by inserting the card and entering a personal identification number known as a PIN. And what is a metric? It's a measurement scale and method used for a measurement of attributes that influence one or more sub-quality characteristics. What is usability? There are many usability concepts proposed by different authors, but Jacob Nielsen provides a more complete definition, which covers most of the characteristics mentioned by other specialists. Nielsen states that usability has multiple components and is associated with the following attributes: learning, efficiency, memory, errors, and satisfaction. Interpret as the perception of the security that customers have when make a transaction from the beginning to the end of it. The lack of security perception causes the client not to use a certain channel to carry out their transactions. For this reason, perceived security is the extent to which a customer believes that a channel is safe to perform their bank transactions. This systematic literature review was conducted as a starting point to identify the current state of research related to the usability and security metrics of ATM interfaces or other banking systems. This review was carried out following the methodology established by Kitchenham and Carter. The definition of research questions was based on the PICOF method, and we can see what was the description of each criterion. For example, for population was banking systems, and intervention, usability, and security metrics. There's no comparison because it's not necessary and not applied for this research. In the outcomes was the study case which report quantitative metrics can be used for a usability and security for ATM. And for the context, we use all the academic context and software industry. With this PICOF method, we build these research questions. The first one is what metrics have been reported in the literature in the last 5 years for the evaluation of usability and security that can be applied to ATM. And the second research question was what metrics have been reported in the literature in the last 5 years for the evaluation of usability and security banking software. The research that we carry out was in the following relevant databases in the research area of this work: IEEE Explorer, ACM Digital Library, SpringerLink, and the thesis repository of the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú. We also established inclusion criteria, information about usability or security metrics for ATM, relevant information about usability and security metrics used in other channels that could be used for ATM, case studies of usability or security evaluations of financial channels, aspects to be considered in the elaboration of usability and security metrics, and we established the following exclude criteria: information and aspects that not correspond to the banking or financial field, information not found in English or Spanish, and papers published before the 2014. After the searching, we found 354 papers in all the research, and we see the results in the screen. And of this number of papers, we only found 3 duplicates. And for identify the relevant aspects, we had to read the title and the summary of each of the results, and we found only 5 relevant papers. These are the titles of each of these papers. Only one of them, the first one paper, it's about the mobile banking, and the other 4 are from the internet banking area, but any of these papers are from the ATM domain. We can see in the results that the focus of this investigation are in Malaysia. 2 of the papers are written in 2015 and 2017, and in the case of Malaysia, one of these papers were wrote in 2014 and the other one in 2017. And also we found a paper from Colombia from 2015. Of these 5 articles, the most significant contribution is that 160 metrics divide in 13 categories of metrics to evaluate security and usability of internet banking from the authors Al-Afari and Al-Sahed and Al-Omar from Saudi Arabia. The authors indicate the points that would be evaluated in each of these metrics. These are the security and usability metrics that we found in this paper. For example, we can see that for security metrics, for example, one of the categories are bank site authentication technology or user site authentication technology, and for example, internet banking application security features. And for the usability metrics, we found categories like interfaces, navigation, reliability, and technical. After the system carried out, we were able to answer to the 2 research questions mentioned at the beginning. In the first question, the results are that no documents were found with this evidence that absence of the specific metrics to evaluate the usability of the ATM interfaces or to evaluate the security interfaces in this channel. And for the second question, the contributions are found and the topic has been analyzed in the case of that we found in the internet bank about usability and security metrics. The paper found the importance of the evaluation of 2 aspects, usability and security, and the close relationship between them. It should be noted that several of the points evaluated for security are not related to the interface, but was related about communications issues of the banking channel. And this aspect was not relevant for the purpose of this investigation. According to that, we can conclude there is an absence of specific metrics to evaluate the usability and security of ATM interfaces. And as a future work, we adapt the usability and interface security metrics obtained for other banking systems in the systematic literature review to identify a proposal that applies in the ATM domain. Thank you very much. I put my personal email if someone has some questions or comments about the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiorella. Thank you for your presentation. We are going to start with the questions. Is there any questions from the attendees or maybe from the panelists? Arturo has a question.
Yes, thank you. The metrics you found what is the way of collecting data? Is this way is automatic? Is manual? What? How is the process of each metric?
Yes, the metrics that we found are not automated, and the way of collecting this data are manual. It's like a checklist that someone, in this case the expert, have to ask to users or the experts on the domain about each question. So, and the answer is yes or no. At the end, they have to look how many yes and how many no's they have. But it's all the process is manual.
Thank you, Fiorella, for your answer. Is there any other question about this research? Joe has a question. Joe, you can ask.
Yes, Fiorella, you said that one of your exclusion criteria was papers published before 2014. Why no papers from 2013 or 2010?
Yes, we established that year because at the beginning of the research, we tried to extend the research until, for example, 2010, but the results were very were known results. So we see that the different.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Fiorella, for your presentation. I have a question. It's possible to find a balance between security and usability. I asked this question because some authors said that more usability a software product has, less security the system has. According to the systematic review that you have performed, what do you think? What you can tell us?
Yes, it's true that in my investigation, I also see this debate about the balance between usability and security aspects. In my opinion, the experts or the interface designers have to be very careful with this balance because it's necessary. For example, it's more important in financial sector. So, in my opinion, this balance can be it's possible, but it requires a big of the requirements or, for example, the guidelines of the domain or the area to match these two aspects and have a very good result.
Okay, thank you, Fiorella. Thank you for your presentation. We are going to continue with the next presentation. The next paper will be presented by Kevin Pereda. He's going to present the study entitled Visually Impaired Accessibility Heuristic Proposal for E-commerce Mobile Applications.
Yes.
Kevin, are you there? Okay.
Yes, hi everyone.
Let's start with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, see this. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. If it's the case, I'm Ken Berea, and today I'm presenting a proposal, a visually impaired accessibility heuristics proposal for e-commerce mobile applications. The one who speaks, Braulio Murillo and Freddy Paz, are the authors of this paper. So let's start talking about e-commerce. We all know what e-commerce is. It is basically selling and buying things online. And e-commerce provides some advantages such as better product understanding, superior availability, global access, privacy, and in general, lower prices. E-commerce is also growing because in 2018, e-commerce sales reached $3,535 million in sales, being mobile devices a key factor with a share of 67.2%. So from this slide, we know that e-commerce is growing. But what is also growing are the number of cases of visually impaired people. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, in 2015, around 189 million people had mild visual impairment, and 217 million people had it moderate or severe. Now, even though there are plans from the World Health Organization, the growth and change in age structure of world's population is causing a substantial increase in the number of people with vision impairment, which is accelerating. So we know that there are more cases of vision impaired people. And in the last years, legislation and initiatives have been reformed, such as the case of the European Accessibility Act, Equality Act, and the other regulation. This states that businesses must ensure that visually or, well, any people with disadvantage do not, any disabled people do not experience any disadvantage during, for example, during shopping. And also there have been litigation events reported in the US. So first, before we continue, I'd like to keep a brief definition of visual impairment. It is any kind of vision loss where parts of the eye or brain that are needed to process images become diseased or damaged. And among these are refractive errors, cataracts, age-related macular degeneration, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy. And as you can see in this picture, this is what you would see if you had one of these visual impairments. So as you can see, you would have problems on any mobile application. For instance, you would have difficulty in text entry, layout proximity, since the buttons can be too close and it would be difficult for you to not to see clearly. The screen size can be a problem also, and according to literature, insufficient feedback for the user. And you will also have problems on e-commerce web applications, such as complex navigation menus, large number of results, some images do not have alternative text, and long product names. Or if you are using a screen reader and the product name is too long, we'll have to wait a lot to get an idea of the product. So yes, people with visual impairment face some problems. So, but we know that there are some standards and guidelines in the literature. But the standards, take for example the well-content accessibility guidelines, are broad and not domain-specific. And actually, when we perform a systematic review in the literature, we found some guidelines that were not listed in these standards, such as the feedback through vibration or sounds, or even adjustable screen readers in speed. So taking into consideration all that I just mentioned, such as that e-commerce is growing, there are more sales through e-commerce, there are more cases of visually impaired people around the world, legislations are being reformed, and that standards are broad, we thought that it was a good idea to propose some heuristics related to this specific domain, which is visually impaired people on e-commerce mobile application. So we used the methodology proposed by Quiñones and Rudo, which fits the needs of this specific project, which is to focus on any aspect of the user experience. In this case, accessibility. The methodology contains 8 stages, which were covered as follows. Stage 1, which basically means that you have to find any information related to the topic. And in this stage, we perform a systematic review. We research about guidelines and standards. And the standards from WCAG 2.0 section 508 in companies such as Google or Apple were taken into account. We associated each guideline from standards with the principle from WCAG 2.0 in order to create a common list that can be applied to an e-commerce workflow. The same procedure was applied for the guidelines found on literature. So, as you can see in this image, we took all the guidelines, we associated each with accessibility principle, and we filtered these guidelines to create a list that that we took as a hypothesis of that could be applied to an e-commerce workflow for the visually impaired people. So with this in mind, we perform user testing in the stage 2, in the experimental stage, with 5 impaired people using the Amazon app and the Falabella app here in Peru, in which we could identify specific needs and problems related to their interfaces. And we could identify that some of the guidelines from stage 1 were covered, in fact, in the apps, mostly Amazon, such as being concise in titles, not using images as titles, associate buttons to purchase functionalities, and support the operating system features. Others were not found, such as the availability of voice commands, listening feedback from the products, Zoom support, adequate customer ratio, or providing tutorials. And also some problems were identified by the user that were not covered in the guidelines. And so the next stage, stage 3, the descriptive stage, we developed some specific domain characteristics based on the user testing and the guidelines. So we proposed these specific domain characteristics. For instance, the audio and vibration feedback, which was listed on literature, and others that were created based on the user testing. According to the methodology, we have to give a priority for each of these domain specific, and we gave a priority of 3 to all of them, since we developed them, so we thought that they all were relevant. It was also validated through experts, and they agreed that they were clear for the domain. According to the methodology, we also have to give user experience attribute priority, and since the study is mainly focused on accessibility, we gave accessibility a priority of 3, but we know that on e-commerce workflow, you can escape from usability or other user experience aspects. So that's why we gave the others a priority of 2 or 1. So in the stage 4, the correlation stage, once we had the following, the specific domain characteristics, the guidelines from standards and literature, and identify problems from user testing. According to the methodology, you have to create a nexus between this and match to some control heuristics. And since we didn't have any accessibility heuristics we consider Nielsen as a start. And when creating this nexus, we found that, sorry, we found that Nielsen heuristics didn't cover all these relations that we just created, and that is a good indicator that we need to create new heuristics. So in stage 5, the selection stage, 4 heuristics were created and 4 modified from Nielsen's. In the stage 6, the heuristics were formally defined according to the template proposed in the methodology. And in stage 7 and 8, we validated the heuristics through user testing and heuristic evaluation. Both results were compared since there were no control heuristics, as is the case with usability. In stage 8, the heuristics were refined to the results obtained from stage 7. So, in conclusion, we ended up with these proposed heuristics. Heuristic 1 is the feedback on the purchase process through audio description and vibration. It means that if you are visually impaired people on an e-commerce mobile application, if you, for example, selected an item, the mobile application should say something like, you just selected this item. Or if you are adding an item to your cart, the application should say, you have just added this product to your cart, or you are about to shop this product. And vibration is also important since the feedback and the sensitive feedback is really relevant for the visually impaired people. And heuristic 2, the adaptation to real-world contrast, basically means that the application must assure a certain level provided by WCAG 2.0 related to contrast. An example of this can be to provide dark mode or other contrasts in the application. In heuristic 3, the correct application of the accessibility tools of the operating system to the application. If the user is accustomed to operating system functionalities related to accessibility, take for example, increasing the font size. If you increase the font size on your device and it is not applied on your mobile application, on your e-commerce mobile application, well, there's a problem, right? And if you use, for instance, the screen reader and you are not able to use it on the e-commerce app, well, you have a problem too. So that is that heuristic 3. Heuristic 4, minimization of the step in the purchase process. It means that if this is more related to usability, as I mentioned before, you cannot escape from usability or other user experience aspects. So if you have a button that can take you to get a product without adding it to cart, then do it. And heuristic number 5, the simplified characteristics of products in navigation. It means that if you're a visually impaired people, well, while you're searching for a product, all the list of products do not need to have a background because it can be distracting. It also means that the titles of the products have to be simple in order for screen readers to be fast, so that the visually impaired people do not take too much in searching for the product. Heuristic 6, the magnification support in all the graphic components of the application. It means that you have to be able to zoom all the graphic components of the application, not just the product itself when you're shopping. Heuristic number 7, encourage voice input method, as it says, because it is easier to to provide some commands instead of typing, since problems in the screen. Heuristic number 8 is standardization of tactile gestures between e-commerce applications. If the user is accustomed to magnify a product with its fingers in a sense, well, then this gesture must be standardized through all the e-commerce apps. And finally, the last heuristic number 9, help in documentation, which means that if you can provide tutorials for the user, do so. So that is the heuristics. In conclusion, we think that it is relevant to focus on other aspects of user experience, such as accessibility, in specific and emerging domains such as e-commerce or for the visually impaired people. Standards tend to be general purpose and not specific, so experimenting with users is relevant. And the methodology that we use, proposed by Quiñones and Russo, turned out to be useful and clear in the majority of its stages. And as future work with the following is proposed, and to increase the population for user testing, and to iterate the validation process again with more experts, maybe from around the world and not just Latin America. So, well, that's all. Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to start with the questions. Is there any question about this research? Okay, Arturo has a question.
Yes, thank you. The methodology you followed is for developing usability heuristic. Do you think this methodology was useful for your kind of heuristics?
Well, actually, there are two methodologies. One is mainly focused on usability, the first published by Russo, and the other one, the one that I am using, is more broad. It is meant to focus on any user experience aspect. So it is mentioned actually in the paper that we can use it for an aspect such as accessibility. So yes, we follow this methodology according to well, the methodology mentions that we can use it for accessibility, so that's why we follow this one.
Thank you, Kevin. Is there any other question from the attendees or from the panelists? Okay, Kevin, I have a question. Can you tell us if you are planning to compare the results of using this new set of heuristics in contracts with a real text with users that have a visual problem in order to corroborate maybe the accuracy of this new proposal?
Well, actually, we performed a lot of user testing. In stage 7, we performed user testing in the AliExpress app, and also experts use the same app to identify some problems. And the problems found by the users and the expert were really similar, and these problems were also covered by the heuristics. So yes, we did apply the heuristics in a real context, and they really identify the problems that the users experience.
Thank you, Kevin. And do you consider that this heuristic could be applied to other domains of software applications?
Well, the methodology, the development of these heuristics were followed, were These heuristics were developed following the methodology. The methodology consists of these 8 stages, and the stages were developed based on this specific domain. So if you want to create other heuristics to other domains, then you would have to follow all these steps in methodology. But as I mentioned in the conclusion, the methodology turns out to be really useful. So I think that following the methodology for other domains would have good results.
Okay, thank you, Kevin, for your presentation.
All right.
Thank you. We're going to continue with the final presentation. The final presentation is going to be performed by me. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. The paper I'm going to present is usability evaluation towards a cultural perspective, a systematic literature review. This research was performed by Yoluana Gamboa, Juan Jesus Arenas, and Frei Paz, who is talking. We are from the Pontificia Universidad Católica de Perú, from Peru. And in this opportunity, the main author is not going to be present, but I am going to present the research. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to usability. Usability is a concept that is considered nowadays as a survival condition for those companies that are involved in the software industry. This can be corroborated by the specialists recognized, Jacob Nielsen, that says that if a user finds a website that is hard to use, or if a user fails to establish what is offering the website, or maybe if the website is hard to understand, the users leave, and this fact could represent a significant loss for those companies that are involved in the World Wide Web. So, given the importance of this quality attribute, several guidelines and assessment tools, like for example, metrics, like for example, principles, rules, design guidelines have been developed. So, however, only some of these proposals has a cultural approach, not all of them. And why is important to consider cultural aspects in software products? Because according to the second heuristic of Jacob Nielsen, the system must speak the user language with words, phrases, and concepts that are familiar to the users. But how we can speak the user language if we do not consider cultural aspects? We need to consider the user perspective and their conceptual model to speak the user language. In this sense, we can say that the cultural aspects are very important in the development of software products. So our proposal was to conduct a systematic literature review to identify design principles and methodologies with a cultural-oriented approach that can be used for the evaluation of usability. The systematic literature review that we follow was based on the protocol established by Barbara Kitchenson. The is a process, a methodology that allow us to identify relevant studies regarding to a topic of interest. In this case, Barbara Kitchenham established 3 phases for the process, for the systematic literature review process. The first phase is planning, in which we have to identify the purpose of the research, of the review. Then we have to execute the review, and then we have a phase of reporting in which we establish the results of the research questions that we have identified during the planning stage. During the planning stage, we have formulated some research questions. In this case, we formulated 2 questions. The first, what procedures are used to establish heuristic of evaluation in cultural aspects in the design of websites? And the second question was, what usability heuristics focus on assessing cultural aspects in website design are reported in the literature? After the definition of the questions, we selected some databases that are relevant in the area of software engineering. In this case, we selected Scopus, Web of Science from Clarivate Analytics, and the database of the Institute Electrical Electronic of Engineers. Then we use this table, this approach proposed by Barbara Kitchenham, the PICOC criteria, to define the general concepts of the research. In this case, we identified that the population was usability heuristics, and the intervention, the cultural aspects that are relevant in this research, the usability on websites, the user experience on websites, and the outcomes were cases studies, guides, heuristics, guidelines, and finally the context was academia and industry. The comparison criterion was not considered because in this research it was not our purpose to perform a comparison. This is the final search string considering all the concepts that are involved in our research. We can see that we have considered metrics, heuristics, guidelines, evaluations, and software products, websites, web systems, and also concepts related to culture. After that, we define an inclusion criteria. We establish that we consider only studies that have been written in English, studies that have been cited by at least 1 publication in order to establish a quality assessment. Studies published since 2000. And as exclusion criteria, we define studies that are not related to websites, studies that address usability but that are not related to cultural aspects. Finally, in the data extraction, in this phase, we start the conducting phase. We develop a template to register all the relevant information about each paper that was obtained from the search, and we established that the following information was important. For example, to establish an identity for each paper, to identify the title, the authors, the type of publication, the name of the conference or the journal, the year of publication, and finally the database. In the data extraction phase, we obtained a total of 112 studies from the 3 databases that were consulted. This research was performed on September 16 in 2019, and after applying the inclusion and exclusion criteria, we determined that only 17 papers were relevant for our research. Here are the 17 papers that were cataloged as relevant from different databases. And finally, after we obtain the results, we proceed to answer the questions, the research questions that we established at the beginning of the systematic literature review. In order to answer the first question related to what procedures are used to establish heuristics of evaluation in cultural aspects in the design of websites, we catalog each paper according to the kind of software that was evaluated. In this case, we considered all the papers in which heuristic evaluation was performed or was reported. We obtained that most of the heuristic evaluation that are reported are from discuss the evaluation of an e-commerce website or software product. However, we can see that e-commerce is not the only domain that is reported in this kind of evaluations. We also identify some design recommendations that can be considered for a future proposal, and only one study reported cultural-oriented usability heuristics. Regarding this study that reports a cultural approach assessment tool, is this the study performed by Jaime Diaz in Chile. He proposed cultural-oriented usability heuristics, and we determined that this proposal was based on the methodology of Cristian Russo from Chile. Also, in this paper, we can see a methodology to establish usability heuristics. Following this process, they define special heuristics based on the traditional to incorporate cultural aspects to be evaluated. Related to the methodology that was identified, we can say that this methodology has 6 stages. First, exploration, in which the specialists are requested to identify the most important aspects of the domain of software, the software domain. Then there is the descriptive stage that is related to identify or to highlight the most relevant characteristics of the software domain. Then the correlation stage, which is focused on identifying those features which are covered by the Nielsen traditional heuristics. Then the explanation stage, which in which the heuristics are formulated with a basis in those aspects that are not covered by the traditional principles. Then the validation stage focuses on the execution of usability evaluation, applying the new heuristics that are formulated. And finally, the stage number 6 focuses on the reformulation of the heuristics according to the feedback that is obtained in the previous cases that were conducted. Also, we identify one paper in which is proposed a relation. In this paper, the author said that the aspects of the user interfaces in websites are very related to the host state cultural dimensions. We can see in these interfaces all the characteristics of these cultural dimensions that establish host state. For example, power distance, individualism and collectivism, masculinity and femininity, uncertainty, avoidance. According to these authors, we can see that all the interfaces in the web, we can see all the cultural dimensions in the design of these websites. According to the second research question, we identify only this procedure that I mentioned. The second question was what procedures are used to establish heuristics of evaluation in cultural aspects in the design of websites. We identify that only 12 documents, in this case, discuss the disadvantages of the traditional heuristics regarding to the assessment of cultural aspects in usability evaluation. But there was only one methodology that was identified that was used to develop cultural heuristics. This paper that I am presenting in this slide, developed by Christian Russo. As a conclusions and future works, we can say that cultural-oriented heuristics are used in usability evaluations of different categories of software products. As we could see, there are different domains that are reported in this kind of evaluations. The new proposals were developed through methodologies. As we can see, there is one methodology that we can use to develop new heuristics based on a specific domain. In these methodologies, the cultural factor was added to the traditional heuristics. This work allows us to identify the existing procedures in the literature that are used to establish cultural-oriented heuristics and the website to which the established heuristics are usually applied, the e-commerce domain. According to the review of these works, heuristics cannot be applied to all the websites equally. We have to take into consideration the specific aspects of each software. And finally, there are heuristics, but there is also necessary to define specific design guidelines that can guide the development of graphical user interfaces. These are the references, and thank you for your attention. If you have any question about this research. Arturo?
Yes, thank you. According to this research, what kind of problems or disadvantages face the current heuristics in relation to cultural aspects?
Okay. The new proposal established by Jaime Diaz consider all the cultural dimensions of host state in order to redefine each of the traditional heuristics established by Jacob Nielsen. Each heuristic was redefined in terms of these cultural dimensions, but they say that we need to review the Hofstede proposal in order to identify how the culture is in each specific country, and according to the kind of culture, we need to evaluate all these 4 aspects in each heuristic according to what they have proposed. That's basically what the work of Jaime is presented. Thank you. Is there another question? Okay. So these were all the presentations of the session. Thanks to all the attendees, thanks to all the presenters and the organizers, and to George for the support. And I hope you have enjoyed this special session in usability and user experience. Thank you.
Can I end the session?
Yes.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.